is Madeline Ildefonso, and I'm a librarian from the Office of Civics and Community Services at the Los Angeles Public Library. I'm here to welcome you to today's Big Read program with our special guest from the International Rescue Committee, Jonathan Fein Proaño. We recognize and acknowledge the first people of this land, honor their elders, past and present, and the descendants. For more information on which territory you may reside on, check out native-land.ca. We would like to also recognize the ongoing refugee crisis. For more information, check out rescue.org/topic/refugee-crisis. We'd like to thank the National Endowment for the Arts Big Read, a partnership with the Arts Midwest, Department of Cultural Affairs, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Lenore S. and Bernard A. Greenberg Fund, the Library Foundation, and the behind-the-scenes staff for helping to bring this program to you virtually. In addition, we would like to thank the Friends of the Chinatown Library for supporting our Big Read program series. If you would like to see more of our amazing programs, please visit our online calendar at lapl.org/events. Our website also has blog posts and video links that highlight the library's diverse resources and upcoming programs. Participants at today's program will have a chance to win a free copy of The Best We Could Do. Email bigread@lapl.org to receive the link to the survey to be entered into the opportunity drawing to win a free copy of The Best We Could Do. You can also scan the QR code on the screen to access the survey. If during this program you're finding that you're having a difficult time, please contact the Los Angeles County Emotional Support Warm Line here at 800-854-7771, available 10:30 a.m. to 9 p.m. daily. And now on to today's program.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Maddie, for the invitation. Thank you to Los Angeles Public Library for having me here today virtually to talk a little bit about the history of the IRC. Some of you may be familiar with the IRC, or International Rescue Committee. Some of you might have seen advertisements on TV, or you've actually donated, volunteered, or were served by the IRC. But the library asked me to come today to talk a little bit about our history. Now we're talking about an 89-year history that I'm going to try to compress into about 30 minutes or so. So let me share some slides, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how IRC came to be, how we came to serve refugees. So I'll start with probably something that a lot of you may know or may not know, that Albert Einstein is actually who started IRC. In a way, he requested IRC to come to existence. But I'll start with this quote, and it's by Albert Einstein himself, that peace cannot be kept by force. It can only be achieved by understanding. And this is a really important quote for me and for our staff across the United States and across the world working with refugees, because working with refugees means either understanding what they're going through or being understanding of what they're going through, and how can we understand their reality to help them find new homes and find safety and find stability wherever they may be. IRC works across the world. So I'm only one of thousands of staff members across the world that works with refugees in humanitarian crisis, emergency response, or even setting up their apartments when they arrive here in the US. So we're a group of people who understand what it means to go through this process. We understand how our clients, our colleagues have gone through this process. So this quote is really, really important to me, really important to us as we get started with some of our history. So I'll just talk a little bit about me real quick so you know who I am. As Maddie mentioned, my name is Jonathan Fein Proaño. I am the integration manager for the IRC office here in Los Angeles. I'm born and raised in Ecuador. I am from Ecuador. I'm an immigrant myself. I work with immigrants. I've worked with refugees and immigrants from across the globe, from Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, El Salvador, Syria, Russia, Cambodia, North Korea, Guatemala, Mexico, my own home country, Ecuador, Peru, and many other countries. I would have actually run out of room in this slide to list all of them. But like myself, my colleagues have worked with these populations as well, and that's part of what makes us IRC. Part of my job in Los Angeles is to help immigrants with immigration issues, but I also can help them navigate economic empowerment questions such as opening bank accounts, along with learning how to save, how to budget, and I have a team that does that as well. And also overall, just looking at integration opportunities for immigrants in Los Angeles. We want to make sure that however it is they got here to the US, however it is they got here to Los Angeles, that they have every single and best opportunity to integrate themselves into the fabric of our city, of our county. So where we work, we are not only located in Los Angeles, we're located across the continental United States as well as the rest of the world. You can find more than 25 offices just in the United States serving all those refugees and immigrants who come to the United States. But then we also work in over 35 country programs and emergency response programs across the world. So you can see in that map plotted the little yellow dots, that's where we're at. And there's other smaller programs or satellite programs that are associated with those main ones where we work at. So IRC responds to humanitarian crises across the world, to emergency response, whether it's environmental response, or in this case, we've been working with the situation in Afghanistan and the Ukraine, but also with the situation in Venezuela and in Central America. So we're everywhere. And if you didn't know we were in the US, now you know, and you have your local IRC office in Los Angeles. I'm one of 30 staff members that you can reach out to with any questions about refugees. So I wanted to give you an idea of who we are now and why we're here today. But now I'm going to talk about how we got here today. And again, I'm going to try to abridge 89 plus years of history into about a 30-minute conversation with you all. So our history starts with Albert Einstein. As I mentioned, he himself was a refugee, I should say, who fled Nazi Germany. And when he arrived in the United States in 1933, one of the many things that he wanted to do was he wanted to ask the world to start an organization that would respond to humanitarian crisis. At that time, it was the American branch of the European-based International Relief Association, which was founded again at the suggestion of Albert Einstein. And this was to respond to the crisis at that time, which was the Germans suffering under the regime of Adolf Hitler. The refugees also from Mussolini's Italy and Franco's Spain were also later assisted in that process. But at the same time, there was an American, Varian Fry, who in 1940 made his way to Europe, to France, and he began to assist refugees on the ground right there. So this was the start. This was, you had the European-based International Relief Association, and then you have the Emergency Rescue Committee coming together in the 1940s, in 1942, to create what we know today as the IRC. Now, this history, of course, at the time was focused on the crisis that what was happening in Europe. It was addressing a situation of an influx of refugees and migrants fleeing Europe at the end of World War II. And that's when the emergency relief programs began. This is when establishment of hospitals, children care centers, and refugee resettlement efforts in Europe started to become something very important and very visible. Unfortunately, in 1946, with the descent of the Iron Curtain, IRC had to restructure itself to establish resettlement programs for Eastern European refugees, which that program continued until the end of the Cold War. So something about IRC that you'll see as I talk about our history and then I talk about our modern responses, there's always something happening to which IRC is able to respond to. And that is something that we take great pride in as an organization. We can go out there and assist in an emergency response at a moment's notice. Part of our work, as you can see, is we have the International Rescue Committee, the Freedom Train in 1951, which was to address the crisis in Eastern Europe. But then we also have the photo on your right, which is one of our food pantry programs in Germany, in Berlin. It was a food distribution program. Fast forward a little bit, and our organization at this point is growing. So we're talking about other crises that were coming up in the world. And we start to see Soviet oppression trying to becoming one of the newer crises that the world was dealing with. So at that point, the IRC starts working also with other countries in Eastern Europe and other programs to try to resettle and assist all these refugees fleeing Eastern Europe. At the same time, we start seeing the crisis to pop up not only in Eastern Europe, but then we start having Cuban refugees fleeing Cuba, making their way to the United States, as well as in South Vietnam. We start seeing the results of the defeat of the French by the North Vietnamese. So this also is the start of IRC's response to the refugee crisis in South Vietnam. Here's some photos, and I'm going to keep these on for a little while just to talk about our response. So part of what we were doing at that time was to resettle refugees outside of Vietnam in other parts of the world. The program develops into a vast long-range relief and resettlement effort for Indo-Chinese refugees. So it also didn't just include Vietnamese refugees, it also included Laotians and Cambodian refugees at the time. So the response of IRC starts in Southeast Asia in 1954. Parallel to that, in 1956, we start seeing relief programs for Hungarian refugees after the revolution that crushed by Soviet forces. So as you can see, the world didn't stop because one crisis was happening. The world continued to do its thing, and the IRC responded with the next crisis. And that is, again, something that we take great pride in being able to do that. Part of our response, and it's not just that IRC offices, all 25 of us, existed at the same time in 1933 or in 1942. Offices start to their operations when a crisis becomes big enough for the response on the ground in the U.S. to be needed. So in this case, our office in Los Angeles started in 1975 in response to the Vietnamese refugee crisis at the time. So our office has been around since then, providing at that time services to refugees from Vietnam and other Indo-Chinese populations, and has since then responded to all the other refugee crises that have come about since then. At around in the 1960s, 1970s, IRC expands its operations to Africa to respond to 200,000 Angolans fleeing Zaire at the time. The IRC also began to work with other Asian countries, such as China, to help Chinese fleeing to Hong Kong from the mainland. So again, our response is based on that. In 1971, as an example, IRC provides extensive support, especially medical, health, and childcare schooling to 10 million East Pakistani refugees fleeing to India. And this work has actually continued to this day in the new nation of Bangladesh. So some responses are long-standing and long-term, which is really key to how IRC continues to work internationally and domestically. Some conflicts are ongoing or are extending themselves, and the crisis of the refugee population doesn't end. So we continue to serve some of those programs. In the 1980s and 1970s, we also start responding to events in Africa, such as the Ethiopian refugees in 1982, as you can see in those photos. And those responses, again, are not something that are planned. It's not something that IRC is waiting for it to happen, but once it happens, we're ready to respond in that moment. As we move on the timeline, there's a lot of other crises, especially in the 80s, that start to happen again. We have the situation in the Balkans, in Eastern Europe, as well as the dictatorships in Latin America in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, to which IRC also responded to those refugee migrations. And again, this is really key to pinpoint, because we're going back to some of these regions today because there's a refugee crisis, because there is an emergency response needed from IRC, even though we may have left years ago. IRC does go back to areas where we've worked at, because we know that we can provide the response needed to serve those populations. As an example, in 1984, in El Salvador, the IRC initiated a broad range of health, childcare, and community development programs for displaced victims of civil war. This became really key to respond to that, and that was one of the major exodus of Salvadorian nationals to the US at that time and to other countries in the region, and IRC was part of that response. In 1987, the IRC began healthcare programs in Poland in partnership with the Polish trade union movement Solidarity. This was in response to the situation, again, in the Soviet Union and in Poland, and IRC was on the ground working closely with UNHCR to provide these services. And again, our response is not just focused on certain regions of the world. We work everywhere. So IRC has always actually been on the ground in Afghanistan. We responded with community rehabilitation activities in Afghanistan in 1988 for tens of thousands of Afghan refugees returning home from Pakistan. So refugees leave their country, but they are able to go back if the situation changes. IRC is also there to respond, to help them come back home and rebuild their lives in their home country. We've also responded to crisis in Jordan, as well as the crisis in Kosovo. So I want to, again, like I said, I crushed 89 years of our history into about 15 or so minutes. And the reason is because that history of responding to the world's crisis informs how we operate today, and informs a lot of our work today, not only, again, domestically, but internationally. So I'm going to show a couple photos and just some very brief information about what we've seen. So the most recent crisis that most of you are seeing in the news, are aware of, is the crisis in the Ukraine. So these are just some photos from the ground. The photo on your left is the border crossing in Poland. This was taken in March, so just a couple months ago. And then the photo on your right is one of our newest response team members on the ground in Poland, looking at one of the makeshift refugee camps that are popping up there. So this case, we're talking about a crisis that nobody anticipated would be this massive, that nobody would anticipate would protract itself this long. But we are on the ground responding to that, helping families who are crossing the border from the Ukraine into Poland and Moldova, into other countries neighboring the European Union, as well as our country programs that we already have in Germany. The other most recent conflict that might be in in everyone's mind right now is, of course, the conflict, or the situation in Afghanistan. IRC was working on the ground very closely with the families there, was working with the mothers, children, with the families in Afghanistan proper, prior to the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban. We do acknowledge that a lot of the work and a lot of the photos I'm showing you here, you may see people unmasked or masked. Some of it was done pre-pandemic, and some of it was done following local health regulations. But as you can see, our work focuses also not only on just getting people from point A to point B, but also, if we're on the ground helping them reestablish their life, we can provide them with assistance, and that can be health assistance, legal assistance, educational assistance. And the purpose is to empower our clients, to empower the populations that we work with to succeed in whatever form that they see that their success can take form. One of our biggest programs, and it's a little blurry on the right-hand side photo, but it's our cash assistance program. And it's a program that we have not only in Afghanistan, but I actually have in other country programs and in the US, where the purpose is to provide financial assistance or direct assistance to families, to clients who are in the process of getting their footing. And that cash assistance goes a long way in rebuilding trust, in rebuilding their faith in themselves, and actually being able to go on and take the next step in their life now that they're rebuilding it. Our other response, some of you may or may not know this, we are actually very active in Latin America, and we do have a response in Latin America to the refugee crisis from Venezuela, as well as the refugee crisis from Central America going up to Mexico, to the US-Mexico border. So we provide services where even families who are repatriated from the US back to their country in Central America, for example, we have a program on the ground that helps them reconnect, relink, and reestablish themselves in their home country. as well as we have programs for refugees who are on their way to another country, if that's their plan, such as you can see in the right-hand photo, for Venezuelan refugees who are leaving Venezuela, going to Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and some of them are making their way up north. And again, programs focus on not only the health of the adult, but also the health of children and their education. These are some photos of our response work in Colombia for the Venezuelan refugee crisis. That's on the top left-hand corner. And then the other two photos are of our Mexico staff working with refugees who made it to Mexico, trying to get to the U.S. In some cases, we did see Syrian refugees making their way to Central and South America, and then trying to make their way up the countries to reach the U.S.-Mexico border. And in Mexico, we established our program there to assist a lot of refugees who were getting stuck there. Our Mexico team is also very crucial in working with all those refugees and asylum seekers who are being sent back due to Title 42. Our Mexico teams are able to help them on the ground on the Mexican side of the border to make sure that they're getting all the information and needs met while they're staying in Mexico. And of course, I couldn't not mention about our response locally in Los Angeles. Like I mentioned, we've been around since 1975 in LA, responding to the crisis at that time of Vietnamese refugees, and have since then responded to multiple crises, including when we've had the arrival of Iranian Christian minorities, when we've had Syrian refugee arrivals, and as well as we've received our Central American refugees and all other populations that have come through our office. Our programs are very curated to where we're at in Los Angeles, where we're at in California, but also to what we do with our clients. So we had our bike drive, our Bike for Refugees program back in 2019, where we were able to get bike donations, for example. Our volunteers came and put them together, and we invited our refugee families to come and first learn the safety of riding a bicycle and the rules and regulations in the US about that, but also so they can enjoy something that our community in Los Angeles wanted to gift our refugees. We also help refugees upon arrival with setting up their apartments. So here on the photo on your right, we have three of our staff members and our refugee client, as they have helped him set up his apartment. And that can seem something as very simple, as very run-of-the-mill, but for refugees, it's not. It's really, really important that they feel as welcome as they can, and our staff goes out of its way to do all we can to make sure that they're feeling welcome. So this is the perspective of refugees upon arrival, but we also want to make sure refugees and immigrants know how to get to the next step. So part of our services include education and financial capability and know your rights in immigration. So we teach them about the importance of voting once they become citizens. We teach them how to become citizens by taking English language and citizenship classes. And these are all key aspects of any refugee success in the US or wherever they may resettle, is finding ways to integrate themselves and knowing why they're coming here, who's going to help them, how can they be helped, and how they can help themselves. As another example of the financial capability work that we do is we did it virtually. So the photo on your left is during COVID, and we were able to continue to provide all our services virtually, which was very key to our refugee and immigrant population, is that despite COVID and our office being close to the public and everybody being at home and everybody having to either wear a mask and or social distance, we could still assist them and provide them the same help that they would have received had they come to our office in person. And this was the truth across all 25 plus offices in the US and across the world. We wanted to make sure that our clients could rely on IRC after all these years to be able to come to us and know that they can still get access to services and be helped out. So a refugee story doesn't stop the moment they flee their country. A refugee story doesn't stop the moment they get on the airplane and make it to their final destination, or when they meet their caseworker. A refugee story is ongoing, and it's for them to tell you about their story, and they will tell you once they feel at home. They will tell you, now I feel I'm part of this. I can share the story of one of my clients that I recently worked with. I did some financial coaching for him, And he came from the Middle East to the United States. He hasn't even been here for a year yet. But one of the last things he told me in his coaching session was, I've never felt as much as home as much as I do now. And that was something that I shared with the staff. And our staff get these stories, and our clients will tell us this all the time. So those are the things that we strive for as an IRC office, and as IRC nationally and globally, to make sure that our clients do feel welcome where they're going to. So I wanted to give some time for people to ask questions as well. I know Maddie has some questions for me. So I want to thank everybody watching this live stream, and for the public library, of course. Some of those photos we're taking at the public library of our clients, for continuing to support refugees in Los Angeles and across the US, and I should say across the world. Our history is ongoing. IRC continues to grow. I've been at IRC for 6 years. I have colleagues who have been at IRC for 20 plus years, and we all keep learning from each other, and we'll keep growing on that knowledge that we're doing great work for refugees out there. So I want to stop there with my IRC history spiel, and I want to see if there's any questions or comments from the community, or if Maddie, you want to throw a few questions my way.
Sure, I am back. Thank you so much for that. I definitely have some questions for you, and some of this is actually work that we've talked about before. The library also provides immigration services, and you can learn more about those services at www.lapl.com/New Americans. And Jonathan and I work a lot together to support that program. So one thing that we've talked about before is a really important nuance in how we talk about refugees. And that's the lowercase r and the uppercase r. And that's going to lead to some deeper conversations about who decides how you are a refugee, or that you are a refugee, and what benefits come with that. So I get lots of questions about that, so I'd love for you to talk about that some more too.
Sounds good. Thank you. So that is a perfect distinction when we're talking about refugees, for semantics, and to understand what refugees are getting and what refugees are eligible for. So I'll start with refugee with a big R. Refugee with a big R are refugees or immigrants who are coming through the refugee program. So they come through the UNHCR, or through, in this case, the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program, and they are designated as refugees by the definition of the United Nations. So they're fleeing persecution. They sought refugee status at a UNHCR camp office or at an embassy. And then they were through a very extensive vetting process. They were allowed to come into the United States as refugees. A refugee with a big R, upon arrival, is entitled to case services and case management by a resettlement agency. IRC is one of those resettlement agencies. And that includes making sure that the family has housing, that the children are enrolled in school, that they're applying for their public benefits, and refugees are eligible for a certain set of public benefits, such as food stamps, medical or Medicaid, depending on the state that you're in, as well as other cash assistance programs to help a refugee get their footing in country and then become self-sufficient. Additional to that, refugees do have immigration pathways to bring certain family members through a very specific process called the I-730. And then eventually the refugee with a big R does lead those refugees to be able to obtain U.S. citizenship. So it is a direct path to citizenship. Refugee with a small r is when we talk about populations who've been displaced, who are fleeing some sort of either natural disaster, government instability, or crisis, but they do not have refugee status as defined by U.S. immigration law, by UNHCR. So a refugee with a small r is somebody, as an example, it can be actually our Afghan arrivals or our Ukrainian arrivals, because they're being granted a status in the United States, but they're not warranted the same benefits as a refugee with a big R. And that's in part and parcel of how the system is set up. In this case, because it's an emergency response, the refugee process is a lengthy process. Refugee with a big R is a fairly lengthy process that can take months or years. Whereas the process by which, for example, Afghan and Ukrainian nationals are coming with, it's a humanitarian parole process. It allows them to come a little quicker to the United States to be temporarily safe here in the US, and eventually they'll have to seek other forms of immigration relief. Refugee with a little r, unfortunately, they're not warranted the same rights as well in terms of accessing public benefits. So it gets a little bit complicated with those populations. It is important for me to emphasize that refugee with a big R, refugee with a little r, doesn't make him any more or less deserving of any help that IRC or anybody can provide them. There are some systemic processes that we have to abide by and respond to, and then we can guide refugees with a little r on how to access other benefits and services.
Great, thank you. That is a really important distinction, and I know that I had, when I heard about Afghan arrivals coming to Los Angeles, I was asking myself those questions like, but why are we calling them Afghan arrivals and not refugees technically? And why are they applying for asylum, versus other pathways for immigration relief? Because I was limited in my knowledge space, and I thought they were capital R refugees, which comes with a whole different set of benefits, as you said. So it's a really important distinction because the other immigration remedies are also time consuming and need to be dealt with pretty immediately. So there's, I know that all of the refugee serving agencies in Los Angeles are really busy right now providing support. And maybe you could talk about how many arrivals are coming into Los Angeles and how many agencies are working with recent arrivals from Ukraine and Afghanistan.
So approximately, so I'm going to give more statewide numbers, given that as a state, we've actually resettled a pretty big chunk of Afghan arrivals primarily in the last few months, and then Ukrainian arrivals. So we're talking well over 3,000 Afghan arrivals in the state. Most of the arrivals did not stay in Los Angeles. Some of them went down to Orange County, and then the big population of Afghans went to Northern California. So that's where the expat population lives. In terms of Ukrainian arrivals, we haven't seen a massive arrival yet. However, we're anticipating that either through the United for Ukraine program that the Biden administration announced a few weeks ago, or for those Ukrainians who are already in the U.S. and may be eligible for the temporary protected status application, we're anticipating that's going to be in the 5,000s, at least for the Southern California region. Mm-hmm. Now, organizations who provide immigration legal services or resettlement agencies will be working with these populations. So, as I mentioned, IRC is one of the resettlement agencies that provides this. In LA, we have two other fellow organizations, International Institute of Los Angeles and IRIS, Interfaith Refugee and Immigration Services. Mm-hmm. So we're the three resettlement agencies that anybody who's coming specifically with a refugee with a big R status, they will be coming to us. But then all the other refugees with little r, so to say, that would come to us can be assisted by us, but then we also have other partners in Los Angeles that can provide them assistance, including CARES and Asian Americans Advancing Justice, CHIRLA, Public Counsel, LAVLA. All organizations that work in the community with us today can actually, and will provide to some extent that based on their capacity, like we will, how we can serve these populations. And it'll vary, right? It'll vary based on if it's immigration legal assistance, if it's housing assistance, food assistance, educational assistance, even finding jobs. Each organization has its ability to assist with whatever is in their ability.
I want to talk more about why refugees, capital R, little r, are sent to Los Angeles, and maybe you could talk about some of the positive things from that interaction, or that, how they come here. But then also, like, what are the challenges to be resettled in Los Angeles? It's not one of the larger, well, you talk about it. It's not, that's your job today.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. Yes, we can help them, but there are challenges with refugee resettlement. So uh, why refugees come to Los Angeles? One reason is they have family or friends, or they have some sort of tie in LA. So for a lot of refugees that come here, that is the reason why they wanted to come here. They mentioned in their process that they had somebody that could help them upon arrival. So that is really key in refugee resettlement as well. If the intending refugee has a relative or a friend or somebody that can help them upon arrival here in the US, that can be very key. So that's one reason why refugees come here. Another one that we've heard is the weather. We've had refugees that are resettled further up north and into the central United States, and sometimes cold weather is not their cup of tea. So we do have refugees told us like we like the weather.
Interesting.
And then of course it's Los Angeles. So we've met refugees, and some of them have gone on to do this kind of work, who are artists, either actors, musicians, painters, and coming to Los Angeles for them was a natural step to be able to be in the mecca of artists, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those are reasons that we've heard, and some reasons that we know of as to why they come here. Interacting with refugees when they arrive, they already have an image in their head of what this reality is going to be like. But when they come here, we help them understand, like, okay, welcome to the US, welcome to Los Angeles. Here are the things we got to do with you to make sure that you're successful. And sometimes we can have a single refugee young man or young woman, and we're working on making sure that they get into college to finish their studies and get themselves employed. But we can also have the big refugee family of 7 or 8 people, 2 adults, and then 6 kids, who we want to make sure first that they have proper housing, and that the kids are accessing safe food and they're going to school. So those interactions can vary greatly. Also, it'll vary greatly based on the population.
Mm-hmm.
But the challenges that come with refugee resettlement. So I showed you photos of refugees who fled harm and who were being resettled, and we gave them all that stuff. Some of the challenges is, and I'll start with the top one, is housing. We know that Los Angeles, Southern California at large, is not the most easily affordable state to be in. So that is always one of the biggest challenges with refugee resettlement, is making sure that we have not only safe but affordable housing for our clients, no matter their family size. The second challenge is getting them employed. Some of our refugees, believe it or not, and if you get to talk to them, were attorneys or engineers or were at the top of their field in their home country, but due to either language barriers or because their degrees are not given the same equivalency here, they're unable to practice their field or their trade. So we have to make sure that we get them into a sustainable job at the beginning of their arrival, and then guide them on how they can possibly pursue their career that they previously had here in the US. So we had a volunteer. He was from Syria, and he was a dental surgeon in Syria before he fled the war there. When he got here, he realized it was impossible financially for him to go back to dental school and start from scratch and get to the point that he was. So he found that he could go to medical school in the US at a US territory at the fraction of a cost and become a doctor. And if my timeline in my head is right, he is either about to graduate from medical school or he's already graduated from medical school. So that's an example of somebody who we told them, look, this is what you got to do. This is how you can do it. And this is how you can overcome this challenge. So the challenges are not insurmountable. We can help, and we have helped refugees overcome them and show them how they can have long-term success. And that's also when, for example, financial coaching comes in, because we can show them and give them long-term tools for that success, however it may take shape for them.
That's really important. I know I've been participating in all of the calls around the city where people are aligning and coming together to provide services. And it really is, everyone's giving a lot of time and energy to provide that infrastructure and support for people transitioning into an entirely new life without really having the language capacity. So like in a family, there might be one person who speaks English, relatively well, and then everyone else in the family has to, go to school to learn the language. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the depth of um, the processing that happens overseas when people come here as capital R, because I think there is also like misunderstanding in that space around why that takes so long. Like, why can't we
Mhm.
just wave a magic wand? And it would seem a lot more efficient, you know, maybe more humanitarian, but there are lots of concerns that governments have, and I'm not an expert at all of that, but I'd be interested to hear, what is the vetting process and why?
Sure. And like you, I'm pretty sure myself and everybody at IRC would wish like we could have that wand to make it to
Mhm.
be a seamless, quick, painless process. So the way refugee resettlement works and the processing and vetting, and I'm going to simplify it for today's presentation, but the way it works is when somebody registers themselves as a refugee with the UNHCR, with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, um, the UNHCR conducts a very thorough interviews, I should say, plural, to understand this person's story and the reason why they're seeking refugee status.
Mhm.
This includes finding out about all family ties, involvement with what they're doing, why they're fleeing, who they were involved with, do they have family abroad, have they been involved in politics or government. So just at the UNHCR stage is a very, very complex and thorough process to make sure that the person's claims are also true and legitimate. So that's say step one. Once they get past that process and they've waited some time, then they get allotted or allocated to a country of resettlement where they're going to be going to. And sometimes some intending refugees will say, oh, I want to go to this country because I have family. Some refugees don't necessarily state or mention where they want to go. So refugees get in a way to choose where they want to go. Again, if they have a family tie or a friend, that tends to make the process a little bit easier. So for the US, once a refugee is assigned to the United States for resettlement, the US government, the Department of Homeland Security, conducts very, very thorough background checks on these refugees before they're able to board the plane to come to the US. So it's security checks, background checks, similar to the ones that they went through with UNHCR, but now they're at the US government level to make sure that they meet and exceed the burden of security vetting that the US government has. So when refugees get here, they've been vetted so much. The US government knows everything about their lives, everything that they did, where they're from, who's their family members that are here, which are the family members that are not here. So there's a pretty clear picture of who these refugees are, and that's why it's a long, lengthy process, because the government is also making sure that the people who are coming in are people who are deserving of refugee resettlement, of the refugee status and government speak, so to say, but are also people who meet the safety and security guidelines of the United States.
So it seems like in the more recently, since Afghan arrivals and we're expecting Ukrainian arrivals, and they didn't go through that process, that they're coming through different immigration pathways. I know Afghan arrivals spent some time at U.S. military bases, where I presume there was some vetting in those circumstances. Um,
Mhm.
do do they? It seems like at that time in the lowercase r situations, they're not receiving as much support after they're released from the bases and kind of matched with these agencies that then piece together a support system for people. Is that kind of an accurate picture of how it comes together, or is it a little more directed than I think?
Um, it's because it was an emergency response. There was the level of vetting and checking is a little bit different. Now, with that said, um, those people were checked at bases or at secondary processing countries before they got to the U.S.
Mm.
And in order to even to be eligible for humanitarian parole or TPS, there's still certain legal requirements that include background checks that the immigrants must meet. So it there are certain still levels of protection that they must go through, that the government puts them through, I should say, to make sure that they're not going to be posing any kind of danger upon arrival here in the U.S. Um, Also, just to clarify, Afghans who were at U.S. military bases had the option to either wait to be assigned to a resettlement agency in a city or state, or
Mhm.
they could also do departure on their own. And that was also for a lot of families who were either have been traveling for a long time, or they had a very clear picture and plan of where they were going. So we also had a lot of Afghans who departed the bases on their own without the assistance of any agency or government, because they already knew where they were going. They had family or ties. So that, but again, they're still both refugees with little r.
Yeah. Okay. And then I wonder if you can kind of bring it around a little bit to what things people can do to help. Lots of people like to volunteer in Los Angeles, may be interested in helping these communities. Are there particular things that you look for or that you're always on alert for?
So I'll actually start with something that everybody can do at home, and it's to petition your government. This is one of the things that we teach in our civics class. That part of the U.S. system is that anybody in the country can talk to the U.S. elected officials and tell them when there's something wrong, something they don't like, something they disagree with. And I know for some of you it might sound like that doesn't have any effect, but I can tell you it does have an effect. Talking to your even to your mayor, to your county supervisors, to your state governor, to your U.S. representative, U.S. senator, assembly member, California senator. Talk to them and let them know your concerns about refugees, that you want them to be here, you want them to arrive, you want them to have a safe path to the U.S. So that's the first thing I would say that can support refugees, no matter who you agree with of who should be here and who shouldn't be here, right? Refugees are refugees; they need our help regardless. So that would be step one. Step two, if you want to volunteer, we have varying degrees of volunteer opportunities, and we can share our information, or you can visit our website, www.rescue.org/Los Angeles, and you can click on volunteer opportunities there. We have need for volunteers to teach classes, for volunteers to help us with some administrative tasks in the office. We have some limited scope work being done in office, so do need volunteers for that. We also have volunteers who've helped us set up homes or apartments for refugees. We had volunteers who help us with financial coaching, and also with volunteer side that help us with immigration legal services, again on the administrative side. So it depends what you want to do. And again, a lot of these things right now are contingent upon COVID regulations and how COVID is evolving. But that's our bread and butter of how we also are able to serve expansively a refugee population, is volunteers like you who come out and help us. That's a big deal. And of course, the third thing, and this is something that you can definitely go to our website for, is if you feel like you want to donate, if you want to donate goods, which I think right now we're reaching capacity in our office, but definitely reach out to our community relations manager through our website. Donating goods is also one way to support refugees. Just bear in mind that if you want to donate goods that you want to send to Ukraine, sending it to our office is not the place to go. We do not have the ability to ship any kind of donations to Afghanistan or to the Ukraine right now, or to Poland. So we can only receive, for example, donations for our population that we serve here locally. But all this information you can find it on our website. And of course, you can always reach out to the library. They've connected us with amazing volunteers over the years. So if you can't get a hold of me, or you can't get a hold of our community relations manager because we're busy running around working with clients, I know our librarians are amazing. Send us volunteers. I think I can count about 7 or 8 volunteers that I've had from the library, and I think half of them are still with us teaching our classes virtually. So there are ways to get involved for sure.
Yeah. And I think it brings me to kind of, I think my last thing I wanted to surface is you mentioned in your slideshow that IRC-LA came out of a need to resettle Vietnamese refugees in the 70s. And, I was just curious if you had any particular story shares or information related to that period of time, that, something that comes up in your agency all the time, or, you know, uh, speaking to that experience that kind of started it all for your home base in LA.
So we don't have any staff that that were around in
Right?
1975 working in the office, but we have had in the past clients who were the children or grandchildren of
Mhm.
refugees that we assisted in the 70s, coming back to IRC saying like, "Well, you helped our family 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and now we're asking you for help with our immigration paperwork," for example. Um,
Mhm.
so we're talking about 1975 to the 2000s, like 2010, 2015, 2016. They still know that we're around. So it comes full circle for us when that happens. When they tell us
Mhm.
like, "I'm the son or I'm the grandchild of a refugee you helped," and we've had uh, that happened with some of our Vietnamese former refugees now that are
Mhm.
citizens here in the U.S. and with other refugee populations. We even have staff themselves who were refugees who are now U.S. citizens who are helping their fellow refugees. So for us, it always comes full circle in that way. When somebody just comes back and tells us, "Well, you helped this family member, you helped my mom, you helped my friend, you helped my cousin, and now I'm trying to help them get connected to you." So that's how it comes full circle for us.
Well, that's great to hear. And the work that IRC does and all refugee resettlement agencies is so um, important to sustain displaced persons, um, from many regions of the world. So we are really glad to be working with you and hear all of the things that you're sharing with us today. It's a really complex landscape. It's not easy to just step into it, or read a news article and kind of have a sense of like, I understand this now. Like it's there's so much to understand, and immigration law is super complex. And I think it's important for everyone to understand what the impact of those complexities can have on people's lived experiences,
Right.
as surviving in new environments. So, and I'll add that through working together, the library has been providing library cards to Afghan arrivals and will continue to do so, making sure that they're aware of resources and materials and information that may be useful for them, even if it's entertainment. Because we do a lot of
Exactly.
learning things here at the library, but we have a lot of entertaining and fun things too. Um, and I don't see any questions. I see some great comments
I'll take
that
them.
people have
Yeah.
shared. So maybe those can be shared on the screen while we close out. Um, and I think that is all I have for you.
So I'll just close it with
Yeah.
definitely if anybody watching this has questions about refugee resettlement, if you have doubts, if you have concerns, comments, definitely reach out to our office and talk to us. We're happy to sit down with you and virtually right now and talk to you about your refugee resettlement and what's going on. But I can also say that working with the library has been an experience by which we've been able to connect clients who would otherwise never go to a public library before, because public libraries, as we have them in the US, is not the same as it is across the world. So it's been incredibly amazing to connect our clients to the public library and the resources. So it's been mutually beneficial and just
Yeah.
as fun to work with the library and making sure that refugees across LA are receiving services not only from us but from the public library. So thank you, LAPL. Thank you, Maddie, for working with us.
Awesome. I must give you a thumbs up on camera, which might be the worst thing I've ever. Thumbs up on camera. And there's a chat going back and forth in the comments, and you know, just small story shares. And I think that's we have so many stories here at the library that have been captured in text or recordings or photographs that illustrate these experiences and the people who went through them. Anyway, thank you again so much. And I'm going to close out with my little closing statement. And all right. So thank you again for joining today's Big Read program. And don't forget to check out our next National Endowment of the Arts Big Read program by visiting lapl.org/big-read. And once again, here's the link to our survey for your chance to win a copy of The Best We Could Do and a gift card for $50 at the library store. Your entry must be in by Wednesday of this coming week. And our next program is at 1 p.m. on May 20th, with the International Rescue Committee. But there are other events this month, amazing lineups of presenters and performers to celebrate the Big Read. So check out the streaming live on the library's YouTube channel. And until next time, we truly appreciate all your support. The success of all of your library programs could not happen without viewers like you. So thank you.